You have a new book, a relatively new book, Climate of Hope.
We do indeed.
And your book and your smart thinking enter into this moment right now where I think people globally are concerned about climate change. People are feeling at loose ends, I think programmatically, about the future of addressing climate change in the current political environment. Are you still optimistic?
Well, I have a lot of things to worry about in the present situation. One of the things I actually worry about the least is American momentum towards climate progress. The remarkable thing is that whatever the president may say, America has decided something different. American businesses have decided, American communities have decided, American mayors have decided, American governors have decided.
When was that moment? Was there a tipping point when collectively all of those stakeholders, arrived in the same place?
Well, the fact is that by the end of 2016, we were already halfway of the way to meeting our Paris pledge. But then in June, things went turbocharged. Because when the president withdrew or attempted to withdraw, because it takes 4 years, from the Paris Agreement, people who thought, well, I'm going to do my part, but really it's up to Washington to lead, said, oh my God, my part is leadership.
And we don't necessarily need Washington.
Well, I don't think people have realized that yet. That is the truth, although Washington would be tremendously valuable, let's be real. But we don't have to have Washington to make a phenomenal amount of progress. And we've seen a doubling since June of the number of cities that have active commitments to help meet our climate commitments.
And then was that because people were concerned about a federal vacuum and then realized they could take it into their own hands? Or was that already in motion?
No, it was in motion, but it accelerated dramatically. And it wasn't just the realization they could take it into their own hands. People saw Trump's withdrawal from Paris as a symbol of American withdrawal from leadership. And Americans don't like to withdraw from leadership. Trump is trying to make America weak. And Americans actually want America to remain strong, and this is a piece of that puzzle.
So what's on your radar 5 years out in a worst-case scenario and a best-case scenario in terms of milestones that we'll see going forward?
Well, I think the most important thing to understand is that the narrative has begun to shift. The cities and the businesses, for example, the Mars Candy Corporation just committed $1 billion to help make their operations lower carbon, climate friendly, and sustainable. We need to be seeing that become a routine announcement 5 years from now. We have...
Do you think it'll become routine?
Well, that's where we're headed. Again, if you go back and say, where were we 2 years ago, where were we a year ago, where are we today, and you project that trend line, that's where we are. Now, those trend lines can always stall out. If people get discouraged, if people start saying, oh, we can't do it without Washington, if Trump manages, which I think he's trying to do, to depress the nation and make it feel disempowered, then we could stall out, and that would be very bad, not just for the climate, it would be bad for the United States. But I don't think that's a likely outcome. Give you an example. We've been fighting with Mike Bloomberg's support, first when I was at the Sierra Club, the continued reliance of American utilities on coal. And we've made remarkable progress. Sometime this fall, we will have retired half of the coal-fired power plants that were in operation only 5 years ago.
I was about to say, so half of the total footprint reduced in 5 years.
About a month after Trump announced he was going to bring back coal and pull out of Paris, the CEO of the CSX Railroad, which gets 47% of its revenue miles from hauling coal, and was founded to haul coal, that was a coal railroad in its birth, announced that he was no longer going to replace coal cars or other coal hauling equipment because the market for coal wasn't going to be around long enough to make it worthwhile to make an investment. So you're going to see a steady shift of investment dollars from old high-energy technologies to new low-energy technologies. That's the key indicator, not what our emissions are today, but where our investment is going. Investment dollars are the key indicator.
What's keeping the other half of the coal-generated footprint from moving offline?
Well, fundamentally, we haven't built enough renewables to replace it. I mean, you do have to replace the coal with something.
Right.
And we are building renewables, but building enough renewables, those coal plants were built over 80 years. Building enough renewables to replace 80 years worth of coal plants takes more than 5 years.
Can the renewables push happen without a meaningful government role in terms of standards and or funding?
Well, the renewables revolution would not be happening except for previous government action that jump-started the whole space. But wind and solar energy are now the cheapest electrons the United States has ever had. The economics are now driving it out. In fact, the Trump administration is saying quite explicitly, unless we subsidize coal, it won't survive. They're saying we need to put federal dollars into keeping alive old coal plants because the president promised he was pro-coal.
It's a job creation program for him.
Well, it's a job creation program for him. That's the one job he may save by his investments on coal.
But getting back to the renewables issue, will this moment throw a hurdle in front of large-scale movements towards...
Well, I think facts tell the story, and the facts are that the largest and fastest growing renewables deals in American history have all been inked since Donald Trump took the oath of office. The largest coal plant shutdowns in American history have taken place since Donald Trump took office. The number of cities that are committed to going all renewable has tripled since Donald Trump took office. So the evidence is Donald Trump standing on the shore and saying to the renewables tide that is rising, don't rise, is absolutely as ineffective as when King Canute did the same thing. But Canute knew it. Canute was making his point. Trump doesn't seem to understand that reality.
Let's travel outside the U.S. for a moment and look at China and India. China actually, in recent months, has taken some very significant and positive steps towards pro-climate policies. Are you optimistic about where China and India will be specifically?
China and India at this point are leading the world. They are going ahead at a pace that is actually kind of staggering. The government of India has announced, and they announced that by 2030, all vehicles sold in India would be electrified. There would be no diesel and no gasoline cars sold in India after 2030. That is a staggeringly fast commitment. And initially, I wasn't sure it was anything more than, a headline. But I am watching them actually take the steps to implement it. They're serious. The Chinese are getting ready to do the same. They haven't announced their date, but they're about to put down a mandate for the number of cars that have to be electrified.
And they've thrown open their auto market to foreign manufacturers if they come in and do electric.
Right. And both countries, the Chinese are shutting down large numbers of power plants. The Indians have canceled all new starts of coal-fired power plants. Both countries are plunging ahead on a renewables-only pathway on electricity. They both still have a long way to go on energy efficiency, but they'll do that because that's just like money in the street. That's just like picking up money off the sidewalk, and those are countries that are pretty good at that. Trump administration, not so much, but China and India are leading the world.
Are there any global roadblocks overseas that loom large for you that would be nice to have out of the way?
Yes, we still are spending the governments of the industrial world are still spending 3 times as much money subsidizing coal and oil as they are subsidizing renewables. I would like to see those subsidies to fossil fuel drive up. Now, Trump is trying to make the United States a big player in that space. Our subsidies right now are much smaller than those of countries like Japan and the EU. Most of these subsidies are countries that won't build coal plants at home because they're dirty, but would love to export coal plants to places like Southeast Asia where they think people don't deserve clean air. And so that's a bad deal, and we ought to stop subsidizing fossil fuels.
As a final happy thought, give me your favorite example of a public-private partnership that has helped move the ball forward significantly around climate change.
My favorite example is probably the city of Georgetown, Texas, which became the first city in the United States to go 100% renewable because they partnered with wind and solar developers in Texas to get all of their power, 100%, for less money than they were paying a 30-year-old coal plant.